Good evening. It is the LFC Daytrippers. It's a Monday night. It is the forum. And fair to say, we've got an above average crew for you tonight. It is Ray, Dicko, your host. And we've got our regular Andy Young in the house. How are you, Andy?
Oh, good, Ray. Oh, very good. Looking forward to a good discussion.
Excellent. Good. We've also got another one of our originals, Stevo Daly. How are you doing, Stevo?
All right, Ray. How's things, mate? You well?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Good. And we've got a very special guest on the Daytrippers for the first time, I believe. We've got Vinny Perth, who was Dundalk manager. He's won many honours as a player in the League of Ireland. Also won the League of Ireland with Dundalk. So it's great to have you in, Vinny, and get some insight.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here, and grew up in late 80s, so obviously had to become a Liverpool fan as well. So probably for me, the greatest Liverpool team is still the 88 team. So last year's definitely pushed us. So big fan of Liverpool for many years.
Yeah, I mean, you're a very similar age to myself, so we probably share a lot of the experiences from the late 80s into probably what was a less fruitful era into the 90s and all the heartache. But obviously, it all come good for us last season, and we'll obviously talk about some of the things that you were bringing up on OTB there last week, Vinny, which was some interesting stuff. We'll get onto your topic in a little while, but tonight we're going to cover philosophy. It's all going to be revolving around Jurgen Klopp, and Jurgen Klopp's philosophy is going to be Stevo's topic. We're going to go back to some of that chat that you had last week, Vinny, around the tactics and some of the subtle changes around the tactics that maybe some fans haven't really appreciated and realised that has taken place over the last few months. I'll have a little discussion around how important data has been in terms of selecting suitable players for the summer. And then, Andy, you're going to wrap things up with a I guess, talking on Klopp's leadership style and maybe some of the things that have happened this season which have possibly sort of derailed some of the things that Jurgen Klopp would have been sort of relying on from not just from his Liverpool days, but from his Dortmund days before. Already getting a comment there from Veranda Cheese around still being beamed up as I was last week. So I'm sure those comments will keep rolling in. So we'll start with you, Stevo, because I think it is going to be a really interesting discussion tonight revolving around Jurgen Klopp. You wanted to talk about, I guess, philosophy. I think philosophy and tactics, they're obviously interlinked, but I think first comes the philosophy and then it comes the tactics. So I guess it's probably just a right way to start this by handing it over to you to talk about, Klopp's philosophy and how maybe he's had to evolve that philosophy when he first come into Liverpool, and now obviously as he's having to cope with a lot of the things that are being thrown at him through the course of this season.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to it, Ray. I think he came in with a style and a philosophy that he wanted to impart on the squad and on the club. Not just the 11 out on the pitch, but an approach to have buy-in from every member of anybody associated with Liverpool. And I think he came in with his shouts of rock and roll football and heavy metal football, and fucking wow. These are all just things Andy told me to say, but I was just following the brief from HQ. But no, in saying that, like he came in with an approach and a way he wanted to do things right across the board, and that took a little bit of time, and we saw that with his first season, where it was a slow bedding in process. We got amazing games where we looked brilliant. We had other games where we got torn open, and it was a learning process for everybody, and a learning process for him to get to know who he was working with and where he needed to plug gaps and stuff. We've then had probably 3 years of a build-up to the crescendo of last season. And to be fair, the season before, there was nothing in it. If you look at those 2 seasons, you know, a couple of points is literally all it was. And in saying that, the level of football played over those 2 years was insane. And COVID and the injuries that we've had this season, I don't think they've changed his philosophy. I don't think there's a you know, a Liverpool Klopp 2.0 you know, happening at the moment. I genuinely don't. I think he'll continue with his approach and his philosophy. I think if anything, Bubak's leaving and Linder's coming in was the biggest shift in how they were doing things compared to maybe the changing of the guard, if we want to call it that now, with maybe Wijnaldum moving on, maybe people talking about Firmino needing to be upgraded, and a couple of other little things in the team as we start to see them happening. So yeah, I think next season we'll see a similar philosophy imparted, but just hopefully with a full squad back and maybe a couple of additional players coming in and pushing first teamers for a spot. Because I think, to be honest with you, Ray, there's a fair few in that squad that probably need to be shook up and moved on. And I'm saying the squad rather than the first team.
Yeah. And that, I think that's been laid bare, hasn't it, this season, because of all that's gone on. It may not have been so obvious had we have continued to just, you know, roll on as we have been in the previous couple of seasons. I mean, Vinny, in terms of, obviously, you know, you know, in your time at Dundalk, you would have had your own philosophy. How important is it to, you know, when you take charge, how important is it to instill your philosophy on your group of players, and then obviously sell that to any incoming players?
Yeah, I think the challenge for Klopp and his philosophy is that sort of heavy metal brand, or whatever you want to call it, is that a lot of that's built on training ground first and foremost. And you often hear people say you bring people right to the edge of the cliff in terms of fitness levels and you bring them back. But actually what Klopp does is he throws them over the cliff and says, we're all out here. And to be honest, only a certain few. If you get back up off the cliff, he keeps you. If you don't, then he moves on. And it might be a bit harsh on, say, someone like Daniel Sturridge, for argument's sake, but I can see why he struggled, because that intensity they trained at that, you know, pre-season were so difficult. And like Sturridge was an amazing footballer for Liverpool, but ultimately couldn't do it. Maybe it's harsh on him, but it's just a good example of someone who, you know, went from being one of the best strikers in the Premiership to gone. And yes, injury played a part in it. And maybe that was down to the training levels of Liverpool. But we've seen it with even Andy Robertson. It took him so long to get into the team because he probably had to get used to a new training. And that's where Klopp's philosophy is difficult. It's not everyone's cup of tea. Some players will actually talk to other players and say, oh shit, I don't want to train like that. Actually, my body doesn't suit that, and he won't sign for Liverpool. And some players would automatically sign for him. And I think we'll go on maybe later on to his leadership, but I think you sign for Klopp the man first of all, and then you sign for him and his style of play and his philosophy. So it is it's an interesting way to do things, but his way of training players and the level of intensity and running power that's needed means that it's not everyone's cup of tea, his philosophy, and it only suits a certain style of player, or else he has to change. And that's going to be the interesting part of him over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed that, you know, from a fan's point of view, it seemed that, you know, the vast majority of players who were at the club did buy into that philosophy. You know, he managed to convey something. And, you know, you highlight an exception, but I'd say that's probably one of the few exceptions, really. I think we've seen a lot of players who really did want to elevate themselves, elevate their careers, and ultimately win things. You know, Jordan Henderson being, you know, an example of that. You know, and the confidence that he put into Jordan Henderson, the man, as well as the player, to elevate himself. I mean, Andy, you've always been very, very sort of complimentary, supportive, top red when it comes to, Klopp. Are you still there, Andy? Yeah. So
Yeah,
I think,
you're breaking up with me there.
Yeah, sorry. And the thing is, at the end of the day, buying into his philosophy is proven to be the right thing. We've got trophies to show for it at the end of the day. What's your overall assessment now in terms of what tweaks Klopp has to make to some of his philosophies?
Yeah, like I think it's like when Klopp then brings in a player, like, you always hear he likes to ask, do you like running? It seems like a simple question for a player, with such a talented player they're about to invest millions on, but that's the basic. They come in and they run, and he runs them into the ground, and it's always been a kind of a concern for me, like, what is the life expectancy in a player in a Klopp team, especially at the beginning, when I think the philosophy has evolved. When he's seen how intense the Premier League can be in terms of the amount of games you have to play, no breaks. Like there's times they're playing like 6 games across a month, and the philosophies had to be tweaked. And I think he's had to do that as a trade-off for winning. The season before we won the league was probably a more exciting and probably a way more heavy metal type of Liverpool, one that pressed harder, ran quicker, more sprints than the year after, when we did eventually win the league. It was a lot more, I suppose the pressing was more focused, and they it was more about efficiency and lasting. And now we're seeing this season, we've a hangover from, like, now there's a lot of facets to the problems that we're seeing this year, and I'm sure we'll get into it as well. But the Klopp is going to have to keep evolving to suit the future. I mean, you can't just carry on and hope that the players can run, the same players can run for another 2 seasons. So I think some of the stuff is being kind of planned, and I think some of the stuff he's learned along the way at Liverpool, some of the changes that were made were just because of how players outperformed in their position and made it their own position. I doubt he ever intended on having Gini Wijnaldum, Jordan Henderson, and Fabinho as a really industrious midfield. I'm sure the intention when he was bringing in Naby Keita and more creative players was to have that bit of creativity in midfield. But it just so happens that that's worked out. But it's just the longevity of it. I think it will need to develop and evolve. And look, it's Jurgen Klopp, so we've every faith in him that he will make those tweaks and changes that are necessary.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing for me around his philosophy is the association with the fans and the association with the history of the club, and how he's managed to tap into that and managed to bring that into almost into a kind of a sort of a next generation, really, in some respects. And the fact that this season is sort of the disconnect has been there, hasn't it? It's been obvious to see, and that really has, aside from some of the other things that we'll talk about tonight around tactics and around leadership, that really has been a component that I think he's in some ways struggled with, because it's a big part of his philosophy, isn't it? It's a big part of what makes him tick, and what makes that connection with the players one that really kind of works and possibly overachieves in some respects. Compared to just the actual parts that he's got available, sort of thing.
Yeah, just
so look, we'll go for it, Vinny.
No, just to, I suppose, not to clear up, but I think the difference is you can play or work under certain managers. It's very difficult to give you an example. I suppose, say Harry Redknapp or that type of manager, or Sam Allardyce. Sam Allardyce is a good example where you can play under Sam Allardyce for 12 months and you'll do anything. If he tells you, we're going to train in the ground today and we're going to walk up and down the stands, you'll do it and you'll get results out of doing that. but there's no longevity to it. Eventually players get worn out, and you know that old-fashioned, and particularly now, and I think we're seeing it, Allardyce hasn't had the effect, and I didn't think he would. But I think with Klopp, I think there's more longevity to what he does. I think, yes, there will be a certain amount of burnout, and some players will fall, but I think the difference with him is there's more structure to it. It's not by the seat of his pants. I think, yes, I don't think you can run at that intensity if you're Jordan Henderson for 5, 6, 7, 8 years in a row. But I think there's a long enough to be able to give him time to bring in new players. And I think we've seen him try to evolve. I think the signing of THIAGO was a prime example of it. For a lot of fans, it does look a great signing, but that was him trying to evolve. And it was a right signing at the time. But ultimately, as a manager, you're judged over a period of time. So I think there's longevity in what he does. I wouldn't be in any way, shape or form critical of that sort of heavy metal or that really training players really, really hard. I think by and large it's a right, and it's a lot longer than people think. You know, that physical element of it will go on longer, I think, than people think.
I think Mourinho's an example of that Allardyce type manager you're talking about as well. You know, even in the best of his teams, he got 2 years, and into his third year, the players had switched off from his message. They'd had enough of it and his demands, and it didn't have the capability for longevity. It probably applies to nearly every manager. Even Pep has had to do it in terms of earlier this season. He admitted that he had to completely change the philosophy. But I think what Klopp probably brings with his philosophy is the buy-in from players. So you look at someone like Dejan Lovren, who went from being first choice when Klopp came in to clearly being a backup centre half and being quite vocal about not being happy about not playing football, but still wanting to be part of that group, knowing that it is about buying into that adage of the sum of the parts, you know, and believing in the idea that the manager has for the club. And I think that's why we were able to hold on to players for any period of time that we really wanted to. The aliens have finally got Ray. He's gone. Gone.
Come back with E.
I think that's what it was.
I'm back.
Yeah, and I think Mourinho's a completely different animal in terms of that Chelsea side he had was brilliant. They loved everything about him. Yeah, but I don't think they got sick of him. I think that was circumstantial. But now he can't rekindle that because the game moves on. And
why do you think he's own? Like, if you look at it, it's not like he's necessarily made his moves after 3 years. Nearly every time, I could be wrong on this actually, maybe, but I'm pretty sure he's been given the bullet after about 3 years each time. First Chelsea team, given the bullet, picks up the job at did he go Inter and then Real, or Real then Inter? I can't remember which way around it was, but I think it was Inter then Real, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think Real was the start of where players didn't really love him. The Inter players were really sad to see him leave. Chelsea players, by and large. I spoke to Damien Duff about it, and I think around that time, or since he would have discussed it, and the real love and the sort of affinity towards him was massive. Them players really would run through brick walls. And that's when you know as a manager you have things right. If players are going to run the old-fashioned saying, run through a brick wall for you. Mourinho had them players to do that. I thought when he came out of it and went on to Sky, and he at the start, I was actually willing him to do well because I thought he'd learned and he sort of copped on himself. Then he started again by alienating people. And that, for me, is the difference. You don't feel that. Now, it's easier when you're successful and things are going well, but you never feel at Liverpool that players are alienated or are feeling left out of the team or being sent to train with the young lads. You never get that sense around Liverpool. You always find, even Kate is a good example. See, when he is fit and he's still on the bench, you always tell he still feels part of the group, and that's ultimately that's man management.
That's the buy-in you're getting from every member of the squad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, you know, if we move it on a little bit to tactics, Vinny, you obviously did a piece there on off the ball, and it was really interesting actually, because as a fan we kind of, you know, we're caught up in the emotions of you know, the lows now, I guess, after the highs, and you know, but by sort of watching the team week in, week out, sometimes you don't necessarily see some of the things that have actually been occurring in front of your eyes. You know, we assume almost that, you know, Klopp is being very stubborn and rigid with the system that he's playing, and in some ways he is, but in, you know, you pointed out there, in a lot of ways this has differed massively as a result of the personnel that have been, you know, changed because of injury and availability, essentially, and by having to drop those natural midfielders, those cogs in the wheel that we used to see in those successful teams, having to go into, you know, centre back positions, or just not being available at all. I mean, Vinny, is this something that was jumping out at you, or did it take a little bit of kind of, I guess, understanding for yourself, or was it something that you kind of very early got onto, sort of thing?
Yeah, I suppose I was lucky. So I would have, I just happened to be around the Crystal Palace game. You remember in Anfield, I think they won 5-6-0. That was Liverpool at their very best. Palace people will say weren't great, but the counter press from Liverpool was outstanding. That was their first team, for want of a better word. That was them at their very best. And I remember doing some video analysis of it and sharing it with the Dundalk's midfield. I was at Dundalk at the time, just sharing it with the players to say, look at the work rate, and even 4-0 up, 3-0 up, Henderson pressing people in the corner flags. And, you know, that's that will, that hunger, that drive. And ultimately, I think that was around the time you won the league, or it was sort of the result that sort of confirmed it all. So I had that in mind. So, and I had just done that. So that's what you do as a coach. I for example, recently, I find it funny hearing people talk about Cancelo on BT Sports, Robbie Savage doing it. But I spotted that 5 or 6 weeks ago. But that's just because we're looking into these different things. Not slagging Savage, but he's certainly no genius. But the point I'm making is that, yeah, as a coach, you're watching all these bits and pieces, but and the knock-on effect of taking, like, people have been this season a little bit critical of Liverpool's front three, and I think they've missed some chances. No doubt about it. I don't think their form, particularly Mane, Firmino, but Mane in particular, because the standard he set last year was so high. But I think we've got to give them a little bit of slack in the sense of what's behind them has changed everything. It's changed their Liverpool play completely. So we call them number 8s or attacking midfielder. If Liverpool's best midfield last year was Henderson, Ronaldo, and Fabinho. When the three of them played, it was sometimes Fabinho would actually be the highest midfielder pressing. Some press fullbacks, and they'd all fit in. Then you'd have Henderson and overlaps. We've seen the great Barcelona game where Wijnaldum rises in the 6-yard box and scores a goal. All of that attacking, running power that he had in midfield was huge. It was absolutely colossal. Also, from a build-up point of view, Fabinho went in and made it a back three, which allowed the two fullbacks really high up the pitch. So, from Salah's point of view, he had Trent high, so the fullback was occupied with where Trent was standing. So that left the window between the fullback and the centre half, the half position for Salah to play in, or to be in at least, or drift into, which meant the centre half would come out, creating more space for Bobby and for Mane. So all knock-on effects. But what we found with the change, and I often say, when you're in a position of strength like Liverpool were, you could add one into that midfield and take one out. And it doesn't, like if you add THIAGO in, And I understand why they done that. Bring THIAGO in because certain games, he's just an amazing passer. Certain games you need someone, whether it's off the bench or starting the game at home, where he comes in and picks out different passes, just changes things. And but the problem is he made five effectively changes. He took his 2 midfielders and put them in centre half. He put 2 more in, and that five, the dynamics of that five changed. He tried THIAGO as a 6, didn't work, and he put Wijnaldum back into the 6 in the West Ham game, and to be fair, it worked a little bit better. But you can put Curtis Jones into that midfield with Henderson, Wijnaldum. He do really well. But he's a little bit inconsistent, but he do really well. Like THIAGO in the midfield. But the knock-on effect tactically of that is huge. And what we've seen is we've seen the SALAH situation, and he's struggling now because in the last couple of weeks we've also seen Trent in Liverpool build-up play. They like to make a back three. Last year was one of the midfielders. It started to be Trent now with the 2 centre halves. And Robertson really high up the pitch. But what that's meant for SALAH is the fullback is now gone. I'll mark SALAH. The centre half of the opposition is gone. I'll stay inside, and we're much more defensively we're solid. Other effect of it, you're not getting Henderson making these runs around Trent, around all these different positions. Or Trent goes and he pulls one back. How many times have you seen getting to the end line, rolling the ball back, and Henderson crossing first time? That's completely gone out of game. And I'm flabbergasted it's taken so long not to fix it, because I know Kloppo has seen it. They see it quicker than us. But just one interesting statistic is that they call the pressure or the press. We call it the press. Simple way to put it. Liverpool would press last season on average 149 times in a game. Now that's down to just under 130. Okay, basically that's huge. But the biggest drop off is in midfield, which backs up the point. It is huge. It's about 25 to 30 presses a game less in central midfield, and that's down to losing your high energy runners in midfield. So it's fascinating to see. The difference with THIAGO playing in Henderson's position is he's looking for little intricate passes, and they're fine and they look great. But the difference of Henderson passes are either first-time crosses or overlaps or driving into the box. And I think ultimately Henderson being out down in midfield has cost Liverpool completely how they change. It's changed completely how they play, I say. And they don't look half of the team as a result of it. And it's a massive setback.
It's 2/3 of the midfield as well, Vinny, for the most of this season that haven't been used to our approach as well, you know, and with a reduced pre-season, and you know, you've got Curtis Jones, who's let's be honest, we're all really pleased with the progress he's made, and he looks a great prospect, but he's a very young kid having to grow up very quickly in a team that's struggling. And you have a world-class central midfielder in THIAGO coming in, who's played in a different. You know, it's not like he came from a Leipzig team who play in a similar style or no, you know, that approach. That's a dominant Bayern team who play in a different way, and his role in that Bayern team was very different than what's being asked of him in this Liverpool team as well. So that's a huge part of your core that's been not just ripped out, but the players that come in aren't like for like in their approach and their you know, ability to deliver that game plan.
You have to remember the knock-on effect by these 2 number 8s, we call them, coming into your team, is that because the press isn't as good, Firmino up front, instead of pressing goalkeepers and centre half, he's now having to run back after the opposition number 6. So me and SALAH and Mane are doing a hell of a lot more work than they would ever do. And ultimately, you don't want them to, yes, they need to run and those and be part of the press, but you don't want them running around like headless chickens. We want them on the ball. And there's a perfect example of that is the Southampton game. If you go back to that, like that was not the start of our problems, but that's when we sort of realised, shit, we have a problem here, Liverpool. Southampton just tic-tacked around Liverpool all day long. And that was your midfield. It was Ronaldo, it was THIAGO, it was Jones, and Southampton just out past Liverpool all through the answer to the press. And I think now you're starting to see the front three going, I'm not going to press here because what's behind me is not good enough. And you've 5 yards.
It's not close enough. So there's too much of a gap to be able to play around.
Yeah, and the last point I'll make is, remember, Liverpool kept a real line last season. Yes, it was very noticeable on set pieces, but it was also in general. And with Van Dijk and Gomez, because they had the pace and the height, they were like squeezing the life out of teams. And even when he played, there was times when Man City had the ball, they'd be only 20 yards of the space. Go in behind us if you want, we'll deal with it, or a keeper will come out and get it. And the knock-on effect of the centre halves and the injuries has changed Liverpool playing. Now the question is, should Klopp have responded and changed his shape? That is the question, and it's that means then does he only have one philosophy and one philosophy only, or should he have changed his shape? And I don't know the answer to it, but it's an interesting question, and he does have answers or questions to answer this year, I think, as a result of a bad in the second half of the season.
Yeah, one of the players who you've touched on there, Firmino, he seems to have a lot of sort of questions to answer at the moment in terms of his form. Has there been is the drop off more of a permanent thing? What you're saying there, Vinny, it's been very obvious, how it's been obvious in terms of how much deeper he's been coming. And gives the ball away. He's giving it away in a much more dangerous area than if he can't, if he can't succeed higher up the pitch. And we've seen a lot of instances where teams have broken then on us as we the ball away in his own half of the pitch. I mean, Stevo, you even touched on it yourself. There's question marks around Firmino. I mean, for you, he's getting a bit of a rest now. He's out the team. He's out the firing line. Do you expect him to come back in the last part of the season and be able to kind of pick up his levels, or do you think what Vinny's talking about there in terms of this being a wider issue around the counter press not working because of the overall issues that we've had, he's still going to fall victim of that in the last part of the season potentially?
I think there's a couple of things to it. I don't know if he's possibly being Adam Lallana in the way that the team might be moving past him. And it's not just this season. The second half of last season, his numbers were way down, and he's just not producing. His pressing isn't as intensive as it was. His ability in front of goal is, it's being questioned over and over again. For the most part, he had one season where he was quite prolific, and I think he hit 23 for the season, but he's never been a goal-scoring centre forward. But the killer for me has been that in key moments when chances have fallen to him, he snatches at them like a centre half playing up front. You know what I mean? It's that little lack of composure that, I'm not saying Jota is the answer. I'm really happy with him this season. But Jota seems to have that little bit of extra killer instinct in terms of just being able to compose himself and put a half chance away, and it makes a difference. And I know I'm sort of throwing it off. I'm actually a little bit perplexed by our decision to bring Kabak in. I don't understand how, when we've decided to proceed with a high line, we haven't changed our philosophy in how we're playing. We brought in a centre half who looks like he runs with lead in his boots. I don't understand. We had 4 months. We 4 months, and even if you say we didn't know where we were going to be at, and they were waiting to see, and they didn't expect the injury to matter, they still had January to sort it out. And I don't understand how he was the best of what they could see out there. Now, unless they played a smart game and agreed, an optional buy and whatever else, that was their way to get shocked, to agree to maybe a lower fee now. and really they just want him for 4 or 5 months, and they've somebody else in mind in the summer. But I'd be really disappointed personally if we sign him in the summer. I don't see it with him. He looks naive. I understand you're coming into a team that's under pressure and whatever else, but he just looks a little bit lost. And I wouldn't mind if he was a little bit naive and young and you could mold him and he had the pace to cope with the way we want to play. But he doesn't. He's getting roasted left, right, and centre. And it's a real worry for me if that's what we saw as the answer for this for the second half.
I think they're being a bit unfair, Steve. We settled well in the last few games.
Has he not had 2 man of the match performances?
Yeah, and he's only 20. And what were we doing when we were 20?
Running faster than when we were fucking 30, I can tell you that. So it's not like he's gonna get faster as he gets older.
No, but to be fair, anyone plays alongside Van Dijk would look good. Like I often say to many suffering Man United fans, if Lindelof, for example, who you all say is rubbish or boy, played beside Van Dijk, I think to be an excellent centre half. So I think the partnership is huge. But to be honest, I think I agree completely. Like, there's no way they need to sign Kabak. Just no way. I think you look at the West Ham game. Best player on the pitch for me was Phillips.
Phillips.
Now he's up against Antonio, suited him. But I like we spoke earlier on about Klopp's philosophy and the will and like he never gives up on players. He loves his players. You can tell all that stuff. But I just don't understand why it took so long to get Phillips into the team. Like, he played them against West Ham. They were very good in the day, again, comfortably. And he didn't play again until Henderson got injured 4 weeks later. And since he's been back in the team, they've kept 3 clean sheets. So why would you spend 15 million on Kabak is what it's going to cost him now? When you have himself there, you have Matip to come back, you have Gomez, you have Van Dijk. It would be a waste of money for me to sign him. And I think he's got to trust that Phillips. The only thing I'd say is, and this is what we don't see, is Phillips isn't easy on the eye. I used the example, he looks more like Jamie Carragher than Van Dijk. And maybe that's Klopp's, he's not Klopp's type of player and he doesn't fit into his philosophy. I often see him shouting to the pitch or waving his hands, and I think it's aimed at Phillips. He probably just doesn't get him. But for me, Phillips has never let Liverpool down, and I don't understand why it took so long to get him into the team. And if it were to be critical of Klopp, God forbid, someone like me, it was how did it take so bloody long to get him into the team? I just leave him in the team.
Do you think, Vinny, it's some of it's down to the fact that obviously he was probably at one point deemed surplus to requirements, and he goes out on loan to Germany, and then obviously circumstances mean that, you know, he's in the picture, he's in the equation. You know, we've often said on this podcast, you'd hear on other podcasts, do you just think he didn't trust Phillips enough to give him a run?
Well, what I'll say on that is I'm reluctant to use the word. That's bad management, though. That's blinkers. Because, like, there's no way he wanted to bring Kevin Kelleher into the team. But when he makes a brilliant save in Europe, he runs onto the pitch and hugs him. There's no way he wanted to bring Williams in at centre half. But when he comes on and wings a big header, he comes on and hugs him. And then Phillips plays well. You've got to forget all the other rubbish. You've got, as a manager, you've got to forget that maybe he's not a great trainer. Now, we know after the West Ham game, it was Man City. It was a big, big game. But what they lost in the Man City game was if he had had that midfield. And he did. And I can't, even if it was Phillips and Matip, I can't understand that. And there might be something in the background. That's what I'm saying to you. I don't imagine he's easy on the eye. I don't imagine he's in training, spraying balls around. If you look at it on the quality today, it looks like Phillips was great more than him. But there's no doubt Phillips has now overtaken him. And as a result, I don't think you need to spend the money on Kabak whatsoever. I think it'd be a mistake.
I disagree with you there, Vinny. I think both of them need to go, to be perfectly honest with you. I know that might sound harsh, but you know, if we want to challenge City and dominate in the league, our aim should be to replace Joe Gomez in that side and put somebody in alongside Van Dijk. Gomez comes down to your third place, Matip comes down to your fourth place. to me, Nathaniel Phillips, all he's done is increase what we're going to get from him when we sell him to Palace in the summer or whoever that is. You know,
I'm not saying, I'm not saying he's the answer to all Liverpool's problems. Far from it. I'm not saying he's the next Van Dijk. He's not. But I'm just saying, when you've got something sitting on the shelf, and you've clearly got massive problems. The one thing about statistics, and we get on to data and team and how they're playing and all this, the 50 analysts in Liverpool and Melwood would have said to them, you know, our running distance is down, our winning the ball back is down, the press, the counter press is down. There you go, Jurgen. So he had to go, yeah, that's because of taking out Henderson and Fabinho. Like, he knew what the problem was. I don't understand the stubbornness not to fix it with. Yes, I'm not saying we've got, you know, Franco Grace on the bench, but put a centre half, a natural one, into your team. And he's proved he's good enough for Premiership level. He may not win the Champions League with him, but he's good enough to be in that Liverpool team. I think that's the not the forced mistake, but that's been a massive mistake. And I think, as I said, he has to answer the questions of the second half of the season. One of them, I think, was staring them in the face.
Yeah. And you have to wonder how many. You have to wonder how many points would have been rescued had he have made that switch earlier. You know, if he'd have gone for that and had the faith in centre backs playing centre back maybe 3 or 4 games earlier, would we now be, I don't know, 5 points better off, 6 points better off? Would we be sitting in 4th place and be talking about us being still in a reasonable position to qualify for Champions League through the league position, rather than this kind of scenario that we probably find ourselves in, and actually having to go out and win the 7th European Cup in May?
Yeah, and there's a brilliant comment from is that Oliver, like, Phillips is your granddad centre back, never easy on the eye, but gets the job done. Yeah, I'm not talking about, we're not going to find another Van Dijk in the Christmas period, particularly in that window. It didn't seem the money was there. It didn't seem he had anyone on the radar. But there was someone in your club ready to do the job. And whenever he's been called on, he's done the job. Different if he came in and played bad for a game or two, I'd understand it. But by and large, he hasn't. He hasn't. And I can't fathom where he didn't see this, or the staff didn't say, do you know what, particularly after the West Ham game, do you know what, we leave this fella in for a couple of weeks and fix our big problem, which is
Vinny, does it come down to Fabinho going back into the centre of the park as well, though? Like, I didn't realise that Kabak got any Man of the Match awards. I thought Alexander-Arnold had actually got a couple from the last couple of games, but I don't give a shit about Man of the Match, to be honest with you. So, but like, the difference that Fabinho has made in allowing everybody to do their job properly from the middle up to the front three eases the pressure on the back four as well. And it does make their life that little bit easier in the games. Obviously, Leipzig played into our hands. But I think Fabinho coming back into the middle of the park has made Phillips and Kabak's job a hell of a lot easier. And those lads would have had a much less torrid time. Had Fabinho played against Leicester, we wouldn't have capitulated in that game. That's just an opinion of mine, you know. And I think, you know, when you look at how we were beaten in that game.
Yeah, I think it's a knock-on effect. He goes in there and releases Ronaldo, who has been playing really well, to be fair. I think if you were marking Fabinho as a number 6 out of 100 and say he was 92, I don't think if you put Wijnaldum in there, it would be a huge drop-off, because it's not his natural position. So I don't think the massive change. But if you put Fabinho in there with Curtis Jones and THIAGO, you still have... Simple. It's just his one. I think the knockout is...
Your point is...
And I often use... So I use Liverpool were one of the best teams for 2 years. We know what the best midfield three was. And we've taken 66% of that out of it, okay? And you've replaced it with 2 other players. So 6, as in each player is 33.3%. You take 66 out of that and you put it back at centre half for most of the season. And what you've replaced it with are different type of players and nowhere near as good and don't suit the style. And the knock-on effect has been calamitous in the second half of the season. I'm shocked that they haven't fixed it quicker than what they've got to.
Yeah, some of this I think come down to the fact that particularly when Fabinho had that run as as our kind of makeshift centre back, his performances were outstanding. He looked like a natural fit, and it started a debate, a bit of a debate amongst fans as to whether he was better as a centre back or as a defensive centre midfielder. But I think as time ticked by and what we started to realise was missing from our midfield, it started to become apparent that irrelevant of how well he was doing as a centre back, we really do that team.
Well, let me just, because that's a brilliant point you made, and just to prove the point, when he went back to centre half, by and large, you still had Henderson and Adam in midfield.
Yes.
By and large. So that's the key. You're only taking one of your three, not two of your three. And that was huge. So when he went in there, Liverpool were still top of the league. I mean, we didn't fall off the train tracks when Van Dijk got injured. It came after that. It wasn't Van Dijk he's acted like he's a huge loss. It came after that. So that's what I'm saying to you. But we can play Wijnaldum, Henderson, and Jones or Thiago, and Liverpool will be very close to the best. But you can't play the two of them in one, or else you have to change what you do. Yeah. So sorry, I don't harp on about the midfield, but it's been huge. Yeah.
It's been absolutely massive. Like this all. Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say one of the other things that Vinny brought up, and it was kind of the last thing he talked about on his analysis on Off the Ball, was something that we've been sort of talking about as well here. I mean, myself and Gav, we were at the first game against Norwich last season. It was last season. And we based on where we sit at Anfield, we have the I guess the advantage of for half the game when Liverpool are attacking down the Alexander-Arnold and Salah, which Vinny absolutely highlighted. Was such a big part of how we were successful last season, and particularly by losing Henderson from that dynamic, it's not allowing Salah to play in between, the fullback and the centre back, and as Gav would often call it, cheat essentially by being able to create so much sort of indecision and uncertainty amongst the defence. I mean, for you, is that been another big thing? This season, losing that, and then obviously the knock-on effect in some ways to Trent's confidence, because he's not got that kind of that partnership that he's so used to having on that side of the field.
Klopp always spoke about how Salah was so dangerous in the half space there between the centre half and the full back. And I remember one of his poorer games was when United went back to a back five, and they put three centre backs there, one right in the way of Salah, and I think it was Shaw that had Salah in his pocket, and they're the spaces. That's where Salah likes to play, inside, and with Trent straight up behind him, and when we had Fabinho in the midfield squeeze and everything. Like, you can't say at all this season that we've sucked the oxygen out of the opposition, whereas you could say that all of last season and all of the season beforehand. So Trent has become more of a traditional fullback this year. He's playing a defending role. He's playing a role like that we traditionally associate with fullback. Yeah, he's up and down the line. But look at last season. He was one of the most creative players. All the assists, all the... I hate using it, the hockey assist, the assist before, the pass before the assist.
No, you didn't just say that.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, there's a player, there's one of our most creative players who's not getting the opportunity to get into those positions anymore. And again, it's all down to the midfield. Right, we went into the season with Fabinho as our fourth choice centre back. It was inevitable with Matip and Gomez. Now, I know he had horrific injuries, right? Particularly Gomez, but it was inevitable we were going to have a long period of time, where Fabinho was going to play centre back. And I said it here at the time, it's so risky because it's not so much I doubt Fabinho's ability to play centre back. It's what you lack in midfield. There's no other player in the world that plays at number 6 like Fabinho. There's no other defensive screen that is chasing the ball up high and is winning so many balls up high and then releasing the ball to Salah, who's in that half space, as you say. So the knock-on effect from having missing personnel or players in the wrong position has been extraordinary, and it's affected everybody. It's affected Mane. It's affected not so much Robertson, because I think Robertson is more of a traditional fullback. It hasn't affected him as much. But look at the drop off in creativity on that right hand side, where we are getting so much ball and so much ball, like, you know, in transition, where players were Salah was able to isolate his man. It just doesn't happen now. Every time Salah gets in the ball, it's just 2 players over to him, nice and easy. Liverpool are that bit more predictable, and look, it's a lot of the time I was looking for answers in so many different areas this season as what's gone wrong, whether it's the lack of fans in the ground, whether it's the injuries alone, whether it's just after winning league, a natural hangover, players needing to regroup and get going again, no pre-season, just so many different things. Klopp being pissed off, like Klopp hates football as it is at the moment. It's quite clear he's all about the fans. But look, Vinny's made some excellent points, and listen to Off the Ball. Maybe it really is just down to the personnel issue. And maybe Klopp should have spotted these things early on. And it did stem from the early decision to go into the season. And he prioritised THIAGO over bringing in a centre-back. And the resulting effect is we've been missing 2/3 of our midfield for practically the whole season. And it's what it's done to other players who have excelled. Like Trent has excelled because of Gini Wijnaldum, Fabinho and Henderson in midfield. They're enablers for players like Henderson or for players like Trent and Robertson to do their bit up high, because they always know that boys in the midfield have the legs to get around and cover them, or at least slow the opposition down if they do lose the ball. So it's had an extraordinary effect. If this was another team, I'd be probably laughing at them and thinking they're making excuses. But it's staring us straight in the face. As soon as they start playing centre halves and getting midfielders back in midfield, look at the effect it's had. Already you can see that we look a little bit more like we did last season. Okay, not exactly, but it's really positive signs, and it's going to be interesting. We'll know at the end of the season, but we'll know then did Klopp make a horrific error not to see this a little bit earlier. But it was a tough decision to make. I don't take what he had to do lightly, because what happened to the players at the back every time, he said himself, every time one of the fitness staff came in, he says, what's up, another centre half, So he couldn't write this shit. But some tough decisions, and you'll wonder now at the end of the season, look, if we win the Champions League and finish 5th or 6th, it's not going to matter. But we could finish the season 6th, 7th, no trophies. And there'll be a lot of questions asked. But look, there's no better manager to turn this around and get it right again, especially when all the players are fit.
I think one of the things, and I haven't heard many people ask about it, but Andy Robertson's form this season has been really poor. And he's looked absolutely no threat on the left-hand side. He cuts back inside 95% of the time now. He gets up to the edge of the 18-yard box, and it's a diagonal ball back into the centre midfield 9 out of 10 times. He's not taking on a fullback. He's not going by them. He's not delivering early. He's not delivering well. And an awful lot has been spoken about Trent Alexander-Arnold and his and Salah's side of the pitch and how they've been less productive. But I think a large part of Mane's problems are related to Robertson not getting past the fullback and creating extra space for Mane to drift into as well. And that's something that I haven't heard spoken about a lot, because that's had an impact on our ability to score goals and break down teams as well.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
I'm going to bring that up because it is so obvious to the naked eye. Robertson, he's being safe. Again, I think that's a lack of a number 8 running down that channel that helps, creates a little more space. But he's just being safe. He's being safe. No,
it's the perfect word, Vinny. That's exactly what he is, safe.
Now, it's been said to me, and I don't like this. I don't like it, but at the same time, you think of him releasing his book, and he's so different things like that. You just is this a year where a couple of lads have lost a bit of focus? A little bit of focus, a little bit of hunger, a little bit of drive. Listen, they're lazy and cheap boys, and I don't like throwing them at footballers because, but I'm speaking as a fan here. So, but I hate that, you know, he doesn't have the desire, a bit of balls to go and get the ball and kind of fullback and great. And it's often one goal can change a season. I often think back to the time where they got the goal of the crossbar against Everton. It was such a big goal, but it was such a fluke. And one little and you need someone like what to go and, as you said, take a defender on, pull him back, and Mane scores from 6 yards, and he ends up with 6 goals in 7 games. And if you think back, I said at the start, I think we've got to cut the country a little bit of slack, no matter who they are, because of what's behind them. So it is. Robinson's got away with a little bit more. But to be fair, then the other side of it for the two fullbacks, you've lost your pace, the 2 centre-halves behind you.
Yeah.
And
so they probably feel that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Any football will tell you, you know, in the old days I played in 4-4-2, and if you remember, you played in midfield. One of the midfielders ran box to box, the other fella sat there. I sat there lazy. But we always had the confidence to go on. I played with, say, Stuart Bourne, Longford Town, and he used to go and get goals and score. But he always knew what I said. The odd time I got into the box, he'd sit. And it was like so simplistic that if I'm Robinson, I'm thinking, if this breaks down and goes over my head, I don't have enough insurance behind me to sort it out. It is the psychological effect. I mean, Liverpool are drifting back as a team, and it's been huge for them. The two fullbacks are suffering.
There's an element of lack. There's an element of lack of confidence and a knock-in confidence as well, because, you know, Robertson isn't the most technically gifted footballer in the world. He was playing at a level due to the overall level of the team, the confidence that flows through when results are coming, all those things. And that can be said for a number of our players, you know, and that's not belittling them. I'm just saying that confidence plays a part, and you get swept up in that wave of results and you feel invincible, and you go out and all it takes is, you know, it's the imposter syndrome, and it happens in every walk of life. You know, all it takes is for a few bad results for that player to then start questioning, well, maybe I'm not quite what I thought I was, or maybe I'm not quite at the level that I'd been producing, and maybe this is now my level. And they lose that little bit of invincibility that they had for so long. And that takes time to rebuild. And I'm not saying any of those players can't attain it again, but there's an element of just the confidence being gone out of these players, and just a little bit of the you know, that last 5% that brings you over the line, just not there this season.
Momentum and football is huge. A bit of luck, momentum is huge. Look at the you look at the game, the weekend rugby. I don't know whether it's a different topic, but you've got 2 managers, right? You've got Andy Farrell and the England coach. Book is behind me. The England head coach.
Jones.
Yeah, Jones.
So on Saturday morning, Andy Farrell is under massive pressure to win that, and Sunday the headlines are he has to lose his job, right? Or then win the game, and all the English media talking about Eddie Jones loses his job. Andy's 5 months off now. The sit not there, and let Leinster and Munster look after the players, and then when they come back, he gets ready next international. That's football at the highest level in one day, and it just flips. And that's what I'm saying about. You need something to go the way. There might be a Champions League win, and Liverpool are back to the best, and could happen. And getting fit is key to that as well over the next few weeks.
Yeah, just another thing as well, that kind of, you know, we often, I think, overlook the fact that even at the goalkeeping position this season, there's been a lot of change, and there's been, you know, times of uncertainty there. You know, we've had Alisson in and out the side. You know, no longer can they rely on Adrian. You know, Queeveen Keller has come in and done an outstanding job, and he's absolutely moved himself on merit to the number 2 position. But, you know, going back to Robbo, playing it safe. You know, he's had, you know, change at centre back. He's had change at goalkeepers to contend with. He's had, you know, let's not forget, we you know, we identified players, and we'll come on to that now, I suppose, in terms of, you know, the data and identifying the players who maybe we need to get, you know, sort of deputies for. You know, Tsimikas, you know, is identified and is brought in the summer as someone who could potentially give Robbo a breather, because it was kind of recognised, I guess, that the level that he was playing at, identify, you know, maybe he can't sustain this again over the course of a season in all competitions. So you've got to bring in a bit of cover and a bit of ability to rotate. So, you know, just in terms of the you know, the data that's going to be used to analyze, you know, the improvements and maybe some of the deficiencies in the squad, and how we evolve and move it on in the summer. It's going to be interesting, really, isn't it? Because, you know, it's probably a season like no other in terms of trying to analyze all of this, because you've had so many things that have changed and so many things that have been outside of your control, and some things that you've thought based on your previous, you know, analysis of the data hasn't worked out for you because of the things have changed before you've been able to kind of prove or properly disprove what you maybe have thought in the past. So, you know, I'll come straight to you, I guess, again, Vinny, on this. I mean, you know, when you were at Dundalk, and obviously, you know, you would have relied on, you know, your back room, you would have relied on the experts in this field. How important is it to get that insight and to understand, you know, what you need to do to, you know, evolve things on and continue to be successful and continue to be at the top of your particular field?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I think if I was to be critical of myself at Dundalk, I probably, I really got into it. You know, I really felt after the first year we won 4 out of 5 trophies, and I said, well, how do I improve myself? And I had to be better at it. And went after that. I met with Stat Sports and asked them a question. They're up in Belfast, and it's funny, an interesting story. But a long story short, I asked them a couple of questions, and I basically to see, you know, all these data sheets now, because everybody has analysts, and you know, something that the analysts would throw you as player A, his top speed was 9.2 or 10.1. All this grand. Well, what does that mean? And when I dug into one of the reports, one of the players hit speed celebrating the goal. So basically, the data was bullshit because he was off celebrating. I was like,
his fastest burst of pace during the game was after he scored a goal.
Yeah. So
cancel his contract. Just fuck him out.
No, he scored a goal. But it just shows you that you've got to be careful with numbers. Like I often say, data should give you questions, not answers. If that makes sense. So you've got to be careful with it. And to be fair, but when I finished with Stat Sports, it was interesting. He said something to me. What you were asking for there, we need to put this camera in this one. There's only one other club in the window. I said, who's that? Liverpool. And I was like, to be honest, I was putting myself right, but it just, I went, right, okay. So basically, it was linking video to live data. So if someone makes a sprint, I'm able to tell instantly, well, it's how you was this. So it's linked to recovery runs. So if a fella's coming back from injury, I want him to be what is top speed in a match, not celebrating a goal, but actually getting to the end line and whipping the cross in. That's his top, some proper action. So I was able to say to the physios, it definitely wasn't Pat Hoban. He never hit top speed. You're able to say to the physios, I want him back fit. The physios able to say, well, in the last match when he was fully fit, he reached top speed and he crossed the ball here, and he go and he replicate training ground. The only other club at the time really doing that was Liverpool. So, and listen, Liverpool have analysts and everything, etc., all over it. So it is huge. It is the data is massive. It also backs up, to go back a little bit, backs up the argument on Trent. Trent this is making more progressive passes, which is forward passes, last season. He's making more passes into the final third than he was last season. But ultimately, his crosses and his final third passes are down, which tells he's starting in a deeper position. That's just a simple statistic that backs up what we were talking about earlier on. And it just so and listen, well, the advantage Liverpool have is they do opposition analysis as well. The level of detail at that club, and I think it's Michael Edwards, the sporting director. He was an analyst as well by trade. Done a lot of. I've looked at the Liverpool analyst department a lot, and they obviously they will be able to tell the opposition's statistics as well. So, for example, if a right full gets tired in the last 15 minutes, or a sprinter come down in the last 15 minutes, then they say to Salah with 15 minutes to go play on his shoulder, or Mane, go and play on his shoulder, because they know in them last 15 minutes is weak. And that's the level of detail. Every team uses data now, all the way down to, Dundalk, all the way up to Liverpool. It's just how good you use it. And to be fair, I think it all comes from the manager. There's a huge buy-in up on it. Huge. And that's what they say. That's what you hear coming out of the ground. He is really driving it. He lets his assist have a chat happen. And some of it will be about the statistics, the data, and relating that to video. It is such a crucial part of the game now. And Liverpool do it better than anybody. The next club, from what I see, are really good in department is Arsenal, believe it or not. But that comes back from the Wenger days. But Liverpool have that spot on, and there's huge investment in that from the sort of Fenway group are really help them with it and have a lot of expertise in that area.
We used to do a lot of that opposition analysis back in the Leinster Senior League as well. Vinny, our manager used to say, "These are shite." That was it. Job done.
Well, that fellow was in the pub last night, so he'll struggle with 10 minutes to go.
Yeah. He was in the bingo fingering grannies.
One of the things that intrigued me when Klopp first came, to the club, and you'd see it. Obviously, you get in the grounds, 20 minutes, half an hour before, whatever, and you'd see the kick around. The one thing that used to intrigue me from an early stage was, Klopp. It's attention to detail in that he would stand there kind of just inside our half of the pitch, and he wouldn't be watching our players. He would be staring intently at their players. He would be looking and seeing how they were, kind of doing their pre-match warm-up, what they were up to, the knockabout. He was staring intently and obviously coupled, I'm sure, with some of the data, some of the, the analysis from pre-match. I guess he makes sure that he kind of pieces every possible bit of evidence he can together to make sure that he absolutely has this nailed on and gets every bit of information over to his team. I mean, Andy, one of the things that, there's a few comments in here around stats, people, stats and data and everything, are in every kind of walk of life. I guess it does, what Vinny, I think, emphasizes there is it's the people who then get hold of it and how they interpret it and how they then use that to their advantage. And let's face it, like if you take another part of, a football club, we haven't got the biggest transfer budget out there. That's obvious by our dealings. That's obvious by some of our I guess you could call it shortcomings. We're not being bankrolled like we haven't got 200 million, I would imagine, in a kitty waiting to be spent in the summer like Manchester City. So it's crucial, isn't it, that this data is used in the best possible way.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, talking about Klopp watching the opposition, he says it's because, you know, he might just see something last minute that he can put into his final team talk or final bit of preparation. So it's that kind of a level of attention to detail. And Klopp has surrounded the club, everything from like these guys to throw in coach, because it was identified how many times they were losing the ball within 10 or 15 seconds after a throw in. So he wouldn't leave any, and if somebody came to him with something, Klopp's the type of player who he does empower people around him and bring in the right personnel. It's no coincidence that Liverpool do have a huge huge wage bill outside the players, because they've that much staff in the background doing various jobs. And stats and analysis, you know, gets a really bad name is because of the I suppose the abuse of the stats and how it's being used to win arguments on social media. You know, this really, really subjective idea of using, because you could pull up any stats on any player and use it to prove a point. You know, the old one is like, look, that player makes more tackles than Virgil van Dijk, so that therefore he's a better defender. But we all know that's not the case. We all know that you know, some of the best defenders in the world never make a single tackle. And so the guys in the background, they're not having fights on Twitter or on going for hot takes on Sky Sports. They're using the stats objectively, and they're going out there, and the power that they have to identify players, a list of players that they can then go, and as Vinny says, ask questions. They can then go and look at their list and see, okay, out of those 10 targets, who's available, who's who actually visually, when we look at it, actually fits it. Who are the players that are running off celebrating and bumping up their stats? You know, so using that is just a tool in the overall you know, decision making process, and that's why Liverpool, I think they have been slightly ahead of the curve. I know every club has a stats department now, but it's just they've been so heavy sided of that. It's asked questions, but if you don't have a huge transfer budget like Man City, you have to find other ways of competing, and they've done that tremendously. You know, their success in the transfer market has been phenomenal. How many teams can you say that practically all their signings have kind of worked out? Okay, some of the more recent ones like Tsimikas and maybe Naby Keita hasn't quite worked out, but their hit rate has been unbelievable, especially with some of the cheaper signings like Robertson. Unbelievable. And I've every faith that they'll be able to continue on that trajectory. Not a lot has changed. You can't take a huge amount of information out of the season because it's been such an unusual season in so many ways. But the objectives aren't very different from the last summer. You know, they're going to try and move on Origi again. They're going to try and move on Shaqiri again, do a clear out, and hopefully the way things are with the economy maybe starting to recover and fans being promised to come back into grounds again, FSG and, you know, everyone in behind the scenes there can start forecasting again about what sort of income is coming and make those decisions a bit better. And maybe there might be funds available to top up on the sales. And look, there's no sure thing. Down there in the laptop room, whatever they want to call it, with the air conditioning, they have a huge amount of players that they can chase. And if it's 3 players, 4 players, 5 players they need, you know, you're confident looking at history with signings made under Klopp that most of them are going to work out.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things for me, you know, the stats wouldn't have told you is what the impact of these players getting COVID would be, you know, on their performance, on their recovery, on a lot of things. And both of those players, you know, Tsimikas and THIAGO have had COVID, and I'm sure there's probably, you know, data being compiled now around every single player who has had COVID and looking at their performances, you know, pre getting COVID and since getting COVID. I'm sure there'll be some some conclusions drawn out of that for various players and subsets of players depending on their age and so on. But just back, I guess one last point on this, back to yourself, Vinny. How would as a manager armed with all of this data and people around you, sort of advising and so on. I mean, how difficult would it be to kind of, I guess, weed out a player who maybe is looking like he, based on the data and the stats, someone, I'm going to pluck a name out of the air. I'm going to pluck out someone who, gets a bit of, we joke about him a bit on this podcast as Adama Traore. Yeah. He flatters to deceive at times. His stat, he must be, if this is a game of, if this is a game of top trumps, he's got 9s for things and he's got 1s for other things. And the 1s are for goals and assists at the moment because he's not giving you an awful lot of productivity. How do you reach that ultimate conclusion? And does it come down to instinct? Do you have to consult other managers, other people in the game? How do you reach that ultimate decision?
Yeah, I think by and large you don't get the level they're at without your eyes telling you a huge amount, or where you are. I think the days of analysts being in the corner are gone, and if they're not gone, then you're not using them right, and you're behind the game. There's a lot of clubs now who just have an analyst in the corner. He has the manager data sheet. He reads pretends he's interested, puts it down, and what you also get, you get sometimes players coming to you. I remember being told a very funny story about a manager in the Premier League in Scotland. And a guy came in who wasn't playing, and he happened to be a foreigner that took a spot. There was a lazy fullback, and he came in and said, "This is bullshit. How come I can't the team when I run 12k, 2k more than him? Blah, all me training this." The manager said, "Hold on 1 second." At the office, went out to the analyst office and says, "Where's the data sheets?" "Oh, they're up on the wall there for lads." Pulled them on the wall and said, "Never put them up again." Because he was giving a player an excuse to knock another player. Ultimately, the player that was in his position was better is the point. And what the data sheets say, fact that you run more. You got to. That's why it's such a big part of the game now. You drill into it, and you drill into like the pick up a point. Like if you look at cross progression, right? Some of it is data driven, and the basics of Liverpool. And if anyone ever wants them, I can share them. I could produce a slide, and because the stats are there for all to see, and I've studied a bit of this. But Liverpool's tackles and interceptions in the last 3 years has slowly drifted down. They're making less tackles defensively and interceptions. At the same time, their goals conceded last season, we went from being third, fourth defensively to the best in the last 3 or 4 year period as well. And that's all like down to so many different things. Their possession, they're keeping the ball more over them a couple of years up until the start of the season, talking about. And they're actually, the amount of passes they make backwards has increased as well. But believe it or not, because they have to keep the ball, and Klopp is big into possession. So, also, their discipline record has improved hugely under Klopp. Free kicks given away statistically and yellow cards. So you could say to me, well, that means nothing, but there's a reason why you keep them. It's not that every day you bring out the sheet and say, here, you made 4 tackles this week or 5 yellow cards or all that stuff. You don't, but it's part of the big picture. It's a little cog in the wheel. It's in the corner. And if you get buy-in from everybody, then it's huge. And it's I don't want to sound like Andy Sunday or anything, but, when he says the inches we need are everywhere, that's where that triggers with people in the top. It is those little inches where if your analyst in the corner is a geek printing out sheets, or you have an analyst in the corner who's a football player, and you see the little marginal gains. As I said, in the last seasons up until this year, Liverpool lost the league by a point and won it comfortably they're fine little things, and it's been huge for them. And this new word coming in, and Liverpool are probably the first. They call it pitch control, and they've live data going on in matches. They can see where opposition are. They're sharing the bench. I think I've never pronounced his name, but Peter Crawwich. It's his job at halftime to go in and show them this stuff in firms, and it shows you that you've got to have buy-in, but you've also got to be very careful that you don't let stats run away with yourself, because ultimately it's a game of, and no one gets it better than them, to be fair. It is a good point. It's a game of emotion. It's a game of, got to go, you've got to be willing to run through the brick wall and all, but all stats are, as I said, questions, and they're probably sometimes it's the finer detail of being able to measure people's stuff. And listen, I think it's part of why they've been messed over the last couple of years, is because they get that off their club, and it's interesting. It's really fascinating. There's a video or a Netflix series just on Liverpool's data department on its own. And I've only touched on the surface of it with some of the research I've done, but it is key for it all,
So we'll move on to the, I guess, we're last topic Andy wanted to discuss really was around leadership and Klopp's style and what he's brought to the club, and what I guess we would absolutely miss if and when, I guess when he eventually leaves us, and I guess some of the recent run of results have created a bit of a cloud over his the length of his tenure in some fans' eyes, which has been a bit bonkers really in some respects. But Andy, you wanted to discuss his leadership and maybe some of the things that have been missing this season, that maybe have affected it, and maybe he's had to kind of modify his ways this season.
Yeah. We won't spend too much time. Just I'm conscious Vinny's been very good staying on for so long, and it's been really insightful in all the other topics. But no, I just think this season, for all the things that have gone wrong, one of the things is, Klopp uses his methods to lead and motivate his players. A lot of the stuff that he was able to use so successfully over the years is gone. I mean, an empty ground alone means that his whole philosophy was about entertaining people. He feeds off the noise of the ground, the noise of the fan, the reaction of the fans, and that togetherness that he created. As soon as he came into Melwood at the time, he wanted just to create that family atmosphere, that everybody was as important as each other, whether it was the canteen staff or the cleaners. Everybody was going to be part of this project, of this future in the club. And now when they go training, they can't even hang around for a shower or a chat or anything. The players can't meet up socially. I always actually remember he was talking about how he encouraged players to go and see each other and socialize together as much as possible. And he wanted to be their friend as well, but not their best friends, because he wanted to be able to make those difficult decisions it's just he fascinates me with how intelligent he is, and how Klopp could be successful in any field. He could do it in any other sport. He could be a politician. He could work in a massive corporation, and he'd make a success of it. It's just all these basic human things that he's able to recognize, and how he's able to empower people. And you look at all the staff he has around him. He knows if he doesn't know something, if he recognizes that somebody is more qualified to make a decision on a topic or subject, he just brings in someone else to do that. And that's where he differs from Pep and Jose. I think these type of people have a lot more self-belief in their own methods and their own tactics, whereas Klopp has that different approach. It's connection with people and connection with the fans, and that's hasn't been present all season. So you can see with everything else, with the injuries, with COVID, players having COVID, and the players moving around the pitches, all the stuff that Vinny pointed out, you have this other thing. One of his most powerful tools to motivate and lead his players is gone, you know, and that's what gives me a kind of confidence that when things do get back to normal, Liverpool will start off, will pick up where they left off, or somewhere near close to it. It's going to be extremely difficult in the season that they've had, but like, you know, as Klopp says, like, he doesn't want to live up on a mountain. He wants to inspire people, and he wants to be inspired. Well, who can he inspire at the moment? Who's inspiring him? It's just football is quite pointless at the moment, and I think Klopp is one of the most, I would say, the biggest advocate for how football is nothing without fans. So look, I think the overall point is when we look at the season and we try and hyper analyze different things, let's just see what things are like when we're back to normal, and look at it then. You know, we can be highly critical of Klopp or the owners, but this has been a global issue and had so many negative knock-on effects that he's such a powerful leader and a powerful motivator. He just hasn't been able to do it this season because of everything. And you know, I'd be interested to hear Vinny's take on leadership and football and the different styles of managers and how they get that buy-in.
Yeah, Vinny, and also the dynamic of losing the crowd as well, how that impacts things and how you have to kind of change slightly. I mean, what's been your kind of experience?
I think for me, what I look at Klopp is, I'm not going to lie, and it's not because I went through a phase of, it's not because results weren't great, because we still had Liverpool at great times with Houllier and Benitez and that, but sort of fell out a little bit with English football a little bit, because I'm such a devoted to League of Ireland in terms of my job and everything. I fell out of love with it a little bit. It was just Klopp came back in, I fell back in love with Liverpool, and really, you know, I would be the type of fan who, if Man United get to a Champions League, once they're not playing Liverpool, I don't mind them winning. So, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm not hatred towards other teams in any way, except ironically Everton is the team I dislike for some reason. But so the point I'm making is Klopp got me back on side. I don't know why. He got me to love Liverpool again, and he bothered if they didn't win or if they only did. And he's brilliant at it. And I think the fans missing, like, my two best mates in life are Manchester United fans, and like, oh, I wind them up every time Liverpool score a late goal and go, that happens nowhere else. Anfield is a special place. Those last minute goals where it's 40 against Newcastle, it just seems to always happen, or it's more common to happen in Anfield. But so the fans, I even felt it when I went back with Dundalk after the first COVID lockdown. Empty grounds, just I, as a manager on the sideline, I'd be someone who'd be up, I wouldn't be sitting down, I'd be involved in the game. I got no energy from the crowd, so therefore I had a flat feeling. And I think that has been huge. I think that's really, really hurt Liverpool more than any other team. You know, some people throw that's an excuse. I don't buy it. I think that's really affected Klopp as the person. And he is the one that inspires the team. Whether that's before, during, or halftime of the game. So I think that's huge. I think his leadership style, what I like about him, I remember he said something, and he's probably he inspires me, but one of the things he said as a coach, and I have taken that mantra, but I had it before that from someone like Stuart Lancaster, who's the Leinster coach, used to manage England rugby team. I would have went in to see him working at, or would have been in just different learning. But he's good at some things, Klopp, very good at other things, and everything else I get experts to help me with. I think that's proper leadership. No matter what they're working in a I don't know, a factory that's making dog food, you get someone who's the very best to design things or design the table or design, and that's what he has all. That's where he doesn't have it all right. I don't know, but I presume he gets the very best expert around him, like a throwing coach. Some coaches, managers would not want the throwing coach. because it scored 2 goals off a throw-in. The throw-in coach will get the credit for it, but he just is so determined to get the best people. I think that's the best type of management or leadership you can have, and I think he's an inspiring person, and I think therefore not having the crowd around him, it looks like he needs a lift. And the other thing, COVID is huge. It's huge. He's lost his own, one of his parents, and hasn't been able to go to the funeral. Lads who were suffering. I know, even going back on my own experience, I lost a family member in the middle of, just before we got back going again. Then someone really close to me died. And you know what? You still have to stand there on the sideline. You still got to score 11 players and 3 subs. You got to take training. And then I drew a game, and then you've got 10 media standing in front of you, a microphone. I'm not going to lie to you, it's difficult. But you've still got to smile, you've got to crack a joke, you've still got to inspire people. And I hope it's just one of them years where it's just been the perfect storm, where everything's gone wrong, and you can fix it. I know that we can.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there, Vinny, is bang on, because and Andy touched on, you know, self-belief earlier on with Mourinho and Pep. I think they're probably more ego-driven managers than what Klopp is. I think he actually possesses far more self-belief than either of those, but it's not on the arrogance and ego side. He's very much a leader who wants to bring in, as you say, the best in the various areas, and therefore that allows him to concentrate on what he's best at doing, you know, and it plays itself out, because people then he's not trying to be the smartest person in the room all the time, and he openly points out that he's not. In fact, he plays down. He's very good at playing down his level of intelligence or his level of importance and all those sort of things. He likes to make himself, you know, the Black Forest boy who's just one of a big team, and I'm nothing special, you know. And it's a very, you know, it shows his intelligence to be able to do that and take the ego out of it, and show every team member that they've no right to be the biggest person at the club either. That every person out on that pitch is as important as the others, and that is driven from the top. You know, if you have an ego, I'm not trying to tell you, but I'm sure you know, if you have an egocentric manager, that allows your team to be driven by big egos on the pitch as well.
I think you, to get to the top of whatever league it is, you have to have a bit of ego about you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Self-belief. I think when I equate it to even the second, like I'm not demanded. I asked the club to go down the route of a sporting director. I had friends and people in football saying to me, and we subsequently heard them both saying, "Hey, man, like you're probably going to undermine yourself. Blah blah. What if he does this? What if he does that?" And I just kept saying, "But the value of bringing that into the club will me better, the job better, easier to do, etc., etc." And that it's that small-mindedness that will catch you out. It's a bit like if I got a job tomorrow and Klopp was available, and people say, he's just going to take a job. No, he's going to make me better. And you have to have that mindset, and you don't.
Yeah.
Listen, you can get to the top the way Mourinho does, don't get me wrong, but I'd rather do the sort of top way and bring everyone on the journey.
Yeah, it's a lack of fear-led management, isn't it? And if you can lead without fear, you give yourself a much better chance of success.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That night is worrying about, you know, my assistants got credit in the newspaper there. Like, Jesus, what's the matter? Team won. We're on to the next game, and we roll on. That's the mindset. It's not. You're wasting negative energy.
Managers rarely lose their jobs over being undermined. They lose them because football's a fickle game, and it takes a few bad results for people to completely flip the narrative. You know, we were talking about this last time I was on, and looking at Villa. You know, it would have been very easy for them to sack Dean Smith, having finished 17th last season. They stick with him, add a couple of signings. It's a different game. Like I would absolutely back us to finish first or second next season with this exact squad if we just restarted the season in September. You know, so all the talk of a shake-up, and of course you like to freshen things up. Football is just, and every sport is so easily swayed by tiny incidents in every single match that make up the overall season. And, you know, 2 seasons on the bounce, you won't end up with the league looking in any way the same.
No, and I think to finish the point on that is that, remember, he made a brilliant point. A couple of years ago, I remember listening to Porrick Harrington, and it really hit home with me because I was Stephen Kenny's assistant for 7-8 years.
Yeah.
But no one really knew I was his assistant. Nobody really knew because that's the way I wanted it. And Porrick Harrington, when he was a vice captain at the Ryder Cup, said, the question was, how did you? He says, well, the key is, if nobody knows I was a vice captain, if I'm not seen on camera and I'm not discussed after the Ryder Cup, it means I've done my job right. Because they talk about me if something goes wrong. And you give out about Klopp staff when something goes wrong, or you'll only give out about the Irish staff or whatever when something goes wrong. So I've always done that mantra that particularly as a assistant for 7-8 years to someone who's very high profile. That suited me. He went off lifting the trophy, and I went and spoke to the 2 or 3 players who'd never got a game on the cup final day, put my arm around them and sort of, and that's the key to it. So if you've got good people around you, I think you've got a chance. There's no doubt Liverpool certainly have that. You can see that in the staff. There's a real togetherness about it.
Yeah, and I think I think it's really powerful what he does with Pep Linders as well when he gives him the team for League Cup. Like he takes the media, he takes the team talks. Like I mean, these are traits that are they're not really seen amongst other coaches in football because they are more ego driven and they are more in terms of the control of everything. But for Klopp to give Linders that sort of experience, because when he did go off and manage on his own, it didn't really work out. But I've no doubt in my mind that in other kind of apprenticeships served with Klopp, Linders is going to make a fantastic manager on his own.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it with Critchley, didn't we? He got the platform, and you know, very soon after he gets a management opportunity, which he takes. And
you imagine Brendan Rodgers allowing that to happen? It's chalk and cheese in terms of the 2 approaches. You know, Brendan Rodgers is the epitome of somebody who wants to show everybody he's the smartest man in the room at all times. Yeah. You know, regardless of who's with him. You could have Stephen fucking Hawking beside him and he's still trying to tell him about theoretical physics. You know, it's just who he is as a person, I guess.
But I have very little memorabilia in the house for years. I think I've won press with a couple of medals in, and I never kept memorabilia of any way, shape, or form. But I remember my wife asked me 6-7 years ago, maybe, what do you want for Christmas? And I sent her a photograph. I didn't want this photograph. And it was Klopp running towards the Kop like this after scoring. Again, I think it might have been Crystal Palace, a game they won and secured Champions League football. But if you remember, the assistant at the time was Kovac. Kovac was sitting down with a pen and a piece of paper writing something. And the whole lot of the bench had jumped up. Klopp was doing his usual celebrating in front of the crowd. And what was fascinating about it was the assistant had a job to do. He was writing something because, yes, they'd scored, but he still had to win the game. So he was focused on his job. And I was just reminding myself, because a couple of weeks before that, we saw the game live on TV. And I came to training on Monday, and it was actually Brian Garton said, "Are you all right?" I was like, "Yeah." And I was watching the match back, and we scored, and everyone was celebrating. You were sitting down. I was like, yeah, but we were about to make a sub. I had to get it right in my head and change set pieces. Well, so it just shows you, like, if you have the right people around you, as good as Klopp is, you've got to have the right people around you to make, and like, his son could have went jumping for the cameras as well, down towards it, and forgetting to fix what was needed in the last 10 minutes to win that game to actually qualify for the Champions League. I can't remember the exact game. I think it was Palace where they qualified. It is your staff. You're only as good as a leader if you're going to embrace your staff and let them grow. And I think that's crucial.
Yeah, well, look, it's been brilliant to have you on tonight, Vinny. I think we seen you, as I say, given some insight on tactics last week, but you've added certainly a lot more, and we thank you a lot for coming on, and hopefully you'll join us at some point in the future. And Stevo, thanks. You're on the spikes according to some of the. So
if spices are the least of my worries, I can tell you that.
Yeah, and closing out the Spice Boys tonight is Andy Young. So thanks again as usual for your contributions, Andy.
Yeah, no, I just want to thank Vinny as well. It's been extremely insightful, and like the comments flying there. They all want to ask you loads of questions about your career. Like, so we'd love to have you on again sometime, and maybe touch on some of League of Ireland as well. But thanks very much. Fair play to you.
It was a pleasure, and just the League of Ireland note, a Liverpool goalkeeper actually looks sensational. Playing for St. Pat's at the moment. Yarrow's and looks, tell you what, Keevan looks a good goalkeeper. This fella looks a hell of a good goalkeeper, playing for Pats at the moment, signed him on loan. So he's one to watch. He shocked me how good he was last weekend. Interesting to see. But no, look, I appreciate it. It's fascinating. You can probably tell I'm a bit of a geek and stats and all that stuff, but that's what I learn, and hope it was insightful enough. Now I enjoy that, and I learn from doing things like this, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, and thanks a lot.
Cheers, Vinny. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so look, we'll be back on next Monday with another forum. We won't have any games to talk about still, because it's an international week. But I'm sure Gav and Keith and Jamie will probably be back at various points this week, and keep you going until we eventually get to another game, which is Arsenal, which I think's now been rearranged for a Saturday night. So a bit of Saturday night football to look forward to in a week on Saturday, which will be good. So until we see you
better
again.
mention the new website that Gav's after putting a huge amount of work in. He'll knock into your gaff if you don't mention that.
Yeah.
It's probably not into your gaff anyway. He'll just be passing by.
But check out the new website. It looks really slick. Gav's put in a massive amount of work. It's everything all in the one place, which is good. LFCDT.com. So check it out. When you get a chance.
With your keyboard.
Yeah. Or your phone, or your whatever you choose, the voice of choice.
Right. We'll see you all next week on the forum. Over and out.